All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Anna Robertson. I'm the Associate Symposium Editor for the Journal of Law Reform for the University of Michigan. I'm joined by some great panelists. We have Professor Savit, who currently serves as the Senior Legal Counsel for the City of Detroit and is an adjunct professor here at the University of Michigan Law School, where he teaches a course related to state and local government and affirmative litigation. And Michele Oberholtzer, immediately to my right, is the Director of Tax Foreclosure Collection for the Detroit nonprofit United Community Housing Coalition. Thank you guys so much both for being here. So just to get us started, Michele, I'd love to ask you if you could explain a little bit about right of refusal and right of first refusal. I know you've mentioned there are some nuances there too.
So, good morning, and thank you for having me here. What I'd like to do, if I could, is explain a little bit about how tax foreclosure works. I'm a counselor, so I see thousands of people each year, and I want to make sure that no one loses their home for lack of information, so I have this conversation all day, every day. So anyway, forgive me if this is redundant. When you own property, you have to pay property taxes. The way that it works in Detroit is that you'll get your assessment in January, you get a bill in the summer and in December, and if you pay your bill, you pay for city services. If you do not pay your bill, it goes basically to collections, to the Wayne County Treasurer. That's the way it is set up. Once it goes to the county treasurer, it can accrue at 18% interest plus fees. That's state mandated. And also, according to our state law, if you fall 3 years behind in your property taxes, then the home can be taken in tax foreclosure. And we take the entire equity, the real property. It's not a lien. So all of that title is now into the hands of the government. And in the history of tax foreclosure under our current law, the majority of foreclosed properties are sold at auction. And in the auction, ostensibly the only real rule is the highest bidder wins. So it can be an opportunity to have affordable properties be purchased and to recycle an abandoned property back into private ownership, but it could also be a speculative tool because there aren't any protections or mechanisms to acknowledge the context. But something happens right before the public auction, which is that the government has the opportunity to purchase a foreclosed home, and that's called the right of refusal. It's sort of an invisible thing to most people, but first the state gets the right of first refusal. If they don't choose to purchase it, it can go to the city. If the city does not choose to purchase it, the county gets a chance, and then anything that was not taken would go up for auction. Most of the time, most properties are not taken in the right of refusal because the city would have to pay for it, and maybe they don't have any reason to want to own it and become responsible for it in that way. So that's kind of the context for how this works, but right of refusal is not inherently good or evil. It can be utilized to give homes just to investor and cherry pick the best properties to divert them so that an individual may never have a chance to purchase it. But it can also be used to try to correct for some of the failures in the law that basically don't consider an individual resident of a home that's up for auction. So that's what we've sought to do with the program that we'll be speaking about today.
Great. Professor Savit, can you talk a little bit about how you see these issues come to life in the mayor's office?
Yeah, so, systemically, we have had, and Michele hit on this, we have had just a rash of bad actors take advantage of the property tax foreclosure crisis in the city of Detroit. What often happens, and this is the fundamental problem we are trying to address, is you see land speculators buy properties cheap at auction. They can get them, if they don't go through the right of first refusal process, they can get them for as cheap as $500. Often they'll just sit on them and let them become blighted eyesores in the neighborhood. What they're thinking of doing is they're thinking, well, if we hold on to this property and then it ends up being in the path of some new development or something like that, then we're going to be able to hold a lot of leverage and sell it for a tidy profit. But in the meantime, they don't do anything productive with the land. They sit there, they let it sit there, they let it become blighted. Oftentimes they'll rent it out, and I'm comfortable using the term slumlords because some of these guys are slumlords, illegally. Right? They won't get their property up to code. They won't get certificates of compliance which demonstrate that they have lead-safe homes. So you have kids being poisoned. They won't pay their property taxes on that, right? So, and it's a 3-year cycle. If you don't pay your property taxes for 3 years, it goes right back to the auction. And there's just a cascading host of consequences that come from this business model, right? Because I mentioned the lead poisoning, I mentioned the blight. These guys don't pay taxes typically if they're on this 3-year cycle and they figure it's just the cost of doing business. Well, you know, why would we pay the taxes if it's just a short-term investment? And then what you see is if they're renting, sometimes the property gets sold to somebody else at auction. There's a tenant there that thinks that they've been doing everything right, and then they get evicted, which is part of what we were trying to partner with UCHC to do through one prong of the Make It Home program. So this is a real problem in the city of Detroit. You know, these guys run multiple shell companies and play games at the auction. And one of the biggest problems that we are trying to address is to make this no longer a profitable business model for these guys, and then also to work on the back end so that the people who were collateral consequences with this disruptive business model are, to the extent possible, either made whole or the damage is minimized.
Thank you. You mentioned the Make It Home program. Michele, can you tell us a little bit about that program and how it works?
So I want to start by saying, you know, UCHC as an organization, we do various forms of homelessness prevention. We do eviction defense. We do home relocation. We do tenant organizing. The largest component of our work is tax foreclosure prevention. We see over 5,000 households per year. Many of those people many times per year. If you're the owner, we want to help you keep what you've got. So I call it radical paperwork. Some of you are going to be helping with some of that tomorrow. So thank you in advance. And so we're trying to make sure that people can utilize programs to keep what they've got, because when a house becomes foreclosed and goes up for auction, it's incredibly vulnerable. We see 1 in 4 occupied homes that are auctioned become vacant within a year, and often a vacant home is permanently abandoned and blighted. Anyway, so we serve those people, but we also meet a lot of people who are not the owner of the home they live in, and it's not a binary, like, are you the owner or the renter? There's so many different versions or iterations by which someone could be occupying a home. And they're not able, even if they have the money, to merely pay the taxes. They have no protection, they have no equity, no ownership. And so actually the foreclosure can be an opportunity. You've heard, you know about the historical predatory lending, the mortgage foreclosure crisis. There's generational homes where people have passed away. There's just so many ways in which we actually sometimes do need a reset button. But what we hope is that when that foreclosure happens, it doesn't equal this, you know, kind of random scattering of opportunity without any, again, recognition of context. So for many years, UCHC has assisted the resident of a foreclosed home to try to buy the home they already live in. Who better to own the home than the one who lives there? And for many years, you know, you could buy a home for $500 in the auction. When I started doing this work, I was shocked to learn that so many people did not even know their home was in the auction. They could afford it, but they didn't even know. So anyway, we try to fill that gap. We try to make sure that people could purchase. But we saw a couple of things happen. First of all, as Detroit's comeback became more apparent and more, you know, accepted, we saw the auction prices increasing. And even before that time, there was this perverse situation where the person who cared best for their home was basically targeted. Obviously, you want to buy the nicest home, so that person may have saved $5,000, gee whiz, but that doesn't mean that someone else with more capital wouldn't say, I would definitely buy a home for 10 or 20, and it would be no-brainer for them, they would outbid, and so we would lose the best homes even when there was a generally cheap market out there. So we tried in every way we can. We were working to possibly change laws or whatever we could do, and we kind of pulled on the thread of that right of refusal, that opportunity, because we had willing partners in the city. So without changing the law, we merely built this program cooperatively to basically have the city flex its muscle. The citizen doesn't have right of refusal, our organization doesn't have right of refusal, but the city does. And the city made sure that certain standards were upheld. Our organization has a very good reputation. We've helped purchase over 4,000 homes over the past 10 years through tax foreclosure. So they knew it wasn't predatory. And they basically flex their muscle on behalf of the residents of our program. They will then deed the homes to UCHC. We will sell the homes to the resident for less than the back taxes, and you become the owner of the home you already live in. So it's so good. You know, there's so many sad and awful things that are really real about the tax foreclosure crisis, but this is a way that we were able to find a win-win-win. The city has more homeowners, fewer blighted homes. The individual gets to become a homeowner, and the neighborhood is stronger for it. So it's really incredible. I don't even know if I answered the question. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Professor Savit, what kind of litigation is the city involved in and currently engaged in to address the tax foreclosure crisis?
Yeah, so one of the things that we started doing back in 2016 is we started suing these land speculators, the corporations, the LLCs, and actually a lot of big banks that had sat on properties, not paid their taxes, let them go to auction, and basically wiped their hands of it. There is a statutory provision which actually allows the city, even after the foreclosure auction is completed, to still go after the owner of that property for any back taxes that weren't recovered at the auction. Now, this is important. I mean, we've gotten, you know, over 12 million, I think, right now in judgments against some of these guys. So that's money in the city coffers that can be used for a whole host of things, you know, better transportation services, you know, after school. We're trying to run a pre-K program very shortly that'll provide access to pre-K for all Detroit 4-year-olds. So, you know, there's money that we can spend in really good ways. But just as importantly, it disrupts this business model, because what these guys have been assuming is, okay, I can not pay my taxes for 3 years. There's basically no overhead cost other than whatever it costs to purchase the property at auction. I can hold on to this property. Maybe my lottery ticket hits and a development comes and I'm able to sell it for a tidy profit. If not, I'll just rent it out to somebody. I'll get the proceeds in. I'll never have to pay taxes. I won't do anything in terms of upkeep, and no sweat off my back, because I'm not in the tax paying game anyway. They built tax avoidance into their cost of doing business. Now, by bringing these lawsuits, what we're saying is that business model is not going to work anymore. Not only are you going to ultimately be held liable for the back taxes and the interest, right? But you're going to have to spend money and time fighting in court against our lawyers, and we got some pretty aggressive outside counsel that, you know, they're working on contingency, so they're appropriately motivated. And it's really annoying these guys, which is great. That's exactly what I want. I want them to be very annoyed. I want them to think that Detroit is no longer a place for them to do business, for them to do that kind of business, right? And I want them to, you know, if that's the kind of stuff they're planning on doing in the future, to get the hell out of Detroit. So we filed thousands of these cases since 2016. They have been successful. I think, I mean, in addition to the money we recovered, we are seeing a rethinking of the business model. Some of these bad landlords have said, you know, they've come crying to us, we're just going to leave the city. Oh, sorry. That's exactly what we want. So that's what we've been doing primarily on the litigation front. There's other sort of legal hooks that we're working on to ratchet up the pressure on a lot of these guys, particularly the landlords. One thing that we, one actual change that we made to the city ordinance that I'm quite proud of is, you know, like I said, a lot of these guys that are renting out properties to renters, they're renting it illegally. They never get the required inspection done by the city. They don't have what's called a certificate of compliance that's required to rent out the property. And part of this is just like, we had a period of time in the city of Detroit where we weren't enforcing this at all. And so like 97% of the rental properties in the city of Detroit did not have a certificate of compliance as they were required to by law. So what we did was we put a provision in the ordinance that said, if you're a renter and you find out that your landlord doesn't have a certificate of compliance, in other words, that they're renting it illegally, you don't have to pay rent. You can pay rent into escrow, and if the landlord continues to not get the property up to code, then you're going to get your money back basically every 60 days, and, you know, then you put it in for another 2 months. So if the landlord gets it in compliance, then they get the money that's currently in the pot. But every 60 days, the tenant gets their money back. So you see, the tenant has the incentive now to actually withhold money. And the best part about it is that there is a right that we have granted under the laws of the city of Detroit that says you cannot be evicted if you are lawfully paying this money into escrow. So we're trying every single sort of legal hook that we have as a city to disrupt this business model to, if you want to be a good landlord, great. But if you are committed to being a slumlord and a land speculator and that's your business model, we don't want you in the city of Detroit.
I want to add a couple things on that. What is the logic of a person of means to let their property taxes get behind? You already heard me say that 18% interest is accruing, not to mention fees. You could get the worst credit card and pay less than that. So why would a person of means do that? The only possible logical explanation is that they don't intend to pay in the long term, or they're going to do the bare minimum. And the minimum payment of taxes can also be mirrored in the minimum investment and repairs and other things. So, this person may continue to pay the bare minimum taxes. They may not let it go into foreclosure every 3 years. They may limp along, but they're always continuing to do the bare minimum, not because it's the cheapest financial model, but because they want to basically be in a getaway mode if they ever want to bail on the property. And that is not that unlikely to happen because you're not making repairs, so it might become, not a real viable option. It's not an ideal situation for a resident. You might think, oh wow, your landlord left, you get to live rent-free. But who is going to make repairs on a home when they don't have any known future in the home? And especially, it's one thing if it's a dripping faucet, it's another thing if it's a roof. So we need to not just save people money on rent, but give them a way to couple their interest with some security in the future of the home, which again is why we work to try to create ownership opportunities. These homes in Detroit are 100 years old in many cases. They have a lot of deferred maintenance. It's not a automatic win-win-win for, all the problems are solved, but it is at least a way to couple the interest of the property with the person who lives in there, and it's one less pocket to fill in terms of the landlord, so that even on a low income, perhaps that home can continue to be improved, which is again necessary for the whole city.
Thank you. I think we have time for one question, and then we're going to transition. We're doing 3 panels. So we'll be doing this panel again 3 times. If you guys want to come back for a longer version of it, you're welcome to stay here or come back at 11:45.
Yeah, so I appreciate the conversation about the bad business model. I appreciate the conversation about why wouldn't you pay your taxes, but there are a lot of Detroiters who couldn't afford to pay their taxes, right? And Detroit has the highest rate of squatters in the country. I understand, I don't know what percentage, I haven't seen any numbers on it, but I do know a significant percentage of those squatters were people who owned their home, who couldn't afford high taxes that were not adjusted. And that's why their home went into tax foreclosure. It would help for me to understand what happens with them. How do they find you? How do you reach out to them? How do they get their house back?
Well, okay, so there's a couple questions or points in there. It's so easy, I think, for a lot of people to demonize a squatter or something like that, but a former owner is a renter now, or a former renter may now be a squatter or a holdover tenant if the ownership changed while they were residing in the home. And we don't really have many mechanisms at all to say, this is a homeless person and this is a personless home, and what can we do to put them together? So as it comes, the simpler version of solving that larger problem, the very real problem, is for us to try to help you retain occupancy of the home you're already in. So we're not helping place people in vacant homes as an agency or as an organization. There are others who do that work, or I think more is needed. But the way that we reach out to people is we send mass mailers, so this is public data, public information. Right now, yellow bags are being placed on the door of about 40 or 50,000 properties across Wayne County that are subject to foreclosure. We will get that list and we will send a mailer to every residential property that is deemed occupied or likely occupied. Not everyone reads their mail, but hopefully, they'll get a couple letters from us. If they go and show up, sometimes even a renter will show up and say, what's going on? Or a non-owner squatter may show up and they can be directed to us for assistance. Sadly, we've seen many people over the years who do pay the taxes under the false assumption that that creates ownership, which it does not. So, again, I don't know if I answered the question, but the primary way we reach out to people is through mail. We also are thankfully referred by a lot of government agencies. Someone shows up at the treasurer's office, they refer them to us, word of mouth, and we do knock on doors. So canvassing is not something we're paid to do, but it's the most effective way. It's a way that someone who gives a shit can make a difference with a minimal amount of information and connect someone to resources to assist. So that's a really important method as well.
Thank you, everybody.